He called me. It was about 8:30 at night on Sunday, and he told me, "Hey, your mom's missing. It happened late last night, but we're gonna come up soon, so I hope to see you." He said that she was floating away, so he threw a life device at her, and then he started swimming or paddling to shore. So I don't know why he didn't drop anchor and look for her. That's the first thing I would have done, is go towards her, not away from her. I don't know, that just, it didn't sit right with me. It took him so long to even tell me that she was gone. So, and I don't know why he didn't go to his boat and call on the radio to other sailboats. Hey, have you seen my wife? She's missing, because I know boaters would probably go out and help look. He's been in part of my life for my whole life almost, and I don't want to believe someone I grew up with did this, because I care about him, but sorry, but it just sucks that like two people that were so important in my life are now gone. They're not a text away anymore. Like, he could probably go for life if this turns out bad, and I don't want to believe that someone that close to me could do something like this.
On the night of Saturday, April 4th, 2026, two people got into a small inflatable boat in the Bahamas. The boat was 8.5 feet long. There was room for exactly 2 people. The engine was attached to the back. The water around them was dark. There was no moon that night. The wind was gusting at up to 25 miles per hour. One of those 2 people was an experienced sailor. A woman who had spent years on the water. A woman who knew what she was doing. The other was her husband. He says she fell in. He says the wind took them apart. He says he paddled for 7 hours. He says he loved her. 4 days later, the Royal Bahamas Police Force arrested him on probable cause. Lynette Hooker has not been found. Brian Hooker has not been charged. But the evidence, what exists of it, has begun to tell a story that does not match the one he has been telling. This is the case file. This is what we know. And this is what the record does not yet explain. To understand this case, you have to first understand who Brian and Lynette Hooker presented themselves to be, because the gap between that presentation and what investigators are now examining is a significant part of the story. Brian and Lynette Hooker were, by their own account, and by every available piece of publicly documented evidence, experienced sailors. Not hobbyists. Not weekend boaters renting a vessel for a birthday trip. These were people who had organized their entire lives around the water. They had been sailing for approximately a decade. At some point during that time, they made the decision to make the sea their permanent address. Roughly 3 years before the events of April 4th, 2026, they purchased a sailboat. They named it Soulmate. They moved aboard. The documentation of their life together on that boat is extensive. They maintained a YouTube channel and a TikTok account under the name The Sailing Hookers. Their TikTok bio read, "We sailed away from BS. A married couple living their best life." Looking at the footage they posted, it is not difficult to understand why they had an audience. Turquoise water, pristine beaches, a couple apparently at ease with each other and with the sea. The algorithm rewarded the image they projected. Now, this is where the public record becomes directly relevant to the investigation, because Brian Hooker's account of what happened on Saturday night rests on the premise that something went catastrophically wrong in conditions that experienced sailors should have recognized and avoided. So the question of competence is not incidental. It is central. The footage on their own YouTube channel is instructive on this point. In one video, Brian Hooker is shown ascending the mast of their sailboat, a full-sized sailboat, not the dinghy we will be discussing shortly. He is harnessed in. He is confident. He moves with the ease of someone who has done this many times. Lynette is on the deck below, spotting him, one hand raised to shield her eyes from the sun. This is not the behavior of people who are casual about their safety. Mast climbing requires technical knowledge, preparation, and trust between the two people involved. You do not do this carelessly. You do not do this unless you have established, between you, a competent working system. The couple's decade of sailing, including long-haul crossings, passages through the Gulf of Mexico, and extended time in the Caribbean, is further documentation of their experience level. These are not benign routes for inexperienced mariners. Offshore sailing demands weather awareness, navigation skill, vessel management, and emergency preparedness as baseline competences. Brian and Lynette Hooker had all of these, or at the very minimum the demonstrated record of them. This matters enormously, and we will return to it in detail. Before we move to the night of April 4th, it is worth establishing the two distinct vessels that are relevant to this case. The first is Soulmate, the large sailboat the Hookers lived aboard, a vessel equipped with a cabin, sleeping quarters, and sufficient space for extended offshore passages. This is the boat Brian and Lynette had navigated across serious stretches of open water. The second vessel is an 8.5-foot inflatable dinghy, hard bottom, outboard engine attached at the stern. This type of vessel, typically used for short transfers between a moored boat and shore, is not designed for open water crossings in adverse conditions. It seats two people, uncomfortably, with no shelter, no navigation equipment of its own, and limited freeboard, meaning the distance between the waterline and the top edge of the boat is small. If the water is rough, the margin for error is narrow. On the night of April 4th, 2026, Brian and Lynette Hooker were in the second vessel. Why they were in the second vessel, at that hour, in those conditions, is the first question this case asks. Carly Ellsworth lives in Michigan. She is the biological daughter of Lynette Hooker. She is Brian Hooker's stepdaughter. He married her mother when Carly was approximately 4 years old. In her own words, he replaced her dad pretty quick. She has known him for the majority of her life. When Lynette disappeared, Carly became the primary public witness to the private nature of her parents' marriage. She has given interviews to Fox News, NBC News, Law and Crime, and others. She has been consistent across all of them. It is important to state clearly what Carly's testimony is and what it is not. It is a witness account, significant on the record, and directly relevant. It is not corroborated by arrest records or criminal charges. No public documentation of law enforcement action against Brian Hooker in connection with domestic violence appears to exist. That does not make her account false. In domestic violence cases, the gap between the incident and the formal record is frequently wide. It makes her account unverified. We will treat it as such, as testimony to be weighed, not dismissed. Carly describes Brian Hooker as a man with a specific and documented pattern of behavior. The pattern involves 3 elements: control, physical violence targeting the neck and throat, and escalation connected to alcohol. On the question of control, Carly says Brian has always been the one to make the rules of the house. She describes him as someone who knows how to push buttons, a phrase that implies deliberate provocation, not impulsive anger. A man who pushes buttons is a man who understands the effect he is having and continues regardless. On the physical violence, Carly does not describe generalized aggression. She is specific. She says Brian goes for the neck. She says she has witnessed him choke his own daughter. This is not hearsay. She states she was present. It is direct observation testimony from a witness who was in the room. On the alcohol, Carly says the couple were sober for approximately 18 months at some point prior to the events of April 2026. She frames that sobriety explicitly because they knew the problems that happen when they drink. The decision to get sober was, in her account, a direct response to the impact alcohol had on their relationship and Brian's behavior within it. When they resumed drinking, the problems returned. Now we arrive at what is, forensically speaking, the most significant piece of testimony Carly Ellsworth has provided. Approximately 2 years before Lynette's disappearance, Carly states Brian Hooker threatened to choke Lynette out and throw her overboard. Read that again. Choke. Throw overboard. This is not a generalized threat of violence. It is not, "I'll hurt you or you'll regret this." It describes a specific sequence of acts, strangulation followed by disposal in water. And it was made, according to Carly, in the specific context of their life at sea, on a boat, surrounded by water, where the method of disposal would be immediately available. 2 years later, Lynette Hooker is missing from a boat in open water at night. In any serious criminal investigation, prior specific threats that correspond with the mechanism of an alleged crime are not coincidence. They are documented behavioral history. They are admissible context. They are precisely the kind of prior act that prosecutors use to establish intent and pattern. Carly has stated this threat in on-record interviews. She is a named witness. She has legal representation. She is not anonymous. She is not speculating. This is what she says she knows. Beyond the specific threat, Carly paints a picture of a marriage under ongoing strain. She says her mother wanted the marriage to work, that Lynette loved adventure, that the sailing life was genuinely something she valued, but she also says Lynette was not entirely happy, that the friction was real and accumulated, that her mother, when asked whether she would stay in the marriage, communicated a woman trying to hold something together rather than one who was thriving. In Carly's words, he cannot make it easy sometimes. He knows how to push buttons. I think she wanted it to work really bad. There is something particularly important in the financial dimension of this dynamic. Carly describes a situation where the couple's finances were functionally dependent on Brian's retirement income. Lynette had her own retirement account, an AT&T pension, but had not reached the age threshold to draw from it. She was under 59 and a half. The couple were living off Brian's funds. Separately, Carly says, her mother would have had to return to work. We will return to the financial dimension in Act 6. But it is worth noting it here, in the context of the marriage, because the financial dependency of one partner on another is a structural feature of coercive control in domestic relationships. It limits exit options. It creates leverage. It is a documented risk factor. Carly says that in the days before Lynette disappeared, she received a voice message from her mother. It was 11:30 at night. Lynette sounded drunk. She said she would talk in the morning. She did not. We are going to reconstruct Saturday, April 4th, 2026, as best the available record allows. Not to dramatize it, but because the sequence of decisions made that day is directly relevant to evaluating Brian Hooker's account of what happened that night. The Hookers were in the Abaco Islands, a chain of islands and cays in the northern Bahamas. Specifically, they were in the area around Elbow Cay, a small island accessible by ferry from Marsh Harbour on Great Abaco. Elbow Cay is a popular destination for sailors. It has a small settlement, a historic lighthouse, and, relevant to this case, at least one establishment where people drink. The Abaco Inn is documented in this investigation. That is where Brian Hooker says the evening began. The couple's sailboat, Soulmate, was anchored near Hopetown, a small settlement on Elbow Cay, to the north of where they were that evening. The distance between their evening location and their boat was not enormous, but it was a water crossing. And in the Bahamas, in a dinghy, at night, in that weather, distance is relative. Now the conditions. Because this is where Brian Hooker's account begins to fracture. The night of April 4th, 2026, was not a calm night in the Abaco Islands. A cold front was moving through the region. Winds were estimated at between 18 and 25 miles per hour, with gusts. There was no moon. It was, in the description of multiple sources, pitch dark. Richard Cook is the team leader of the Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue, the local first responder organization that began the search for Lynette. He has been on the water in the Abacos his entire life. He knows these conditions intimately. Cook described the night in unambiguous terms. Nighttime, very windy, no moon out yet. So it was pitch dark and very rough conditions for the small boat they were in. He added, it was just a lot of bad decisions. Cook also stated his belief that alcohol was involved. A maritime attorney reviewing the case was equally direct. Experienced mariners would have been aware of the sea conditions. Going out, on that dinghy, at that hour, in that weather, does not fit the profile of people who practice safety. Here is the specific question the conditions raise. Brian and Lynette Hooker were experienced sailors. They had crossed the Gulf of Mexico. They had sailed the Caribbean. They knew how to read weather. They knew what 25-mile-per-hour winds meant for a small, inflatable dinghy in the dark. They had, by all available evidence, spent years making careful decisions at sea. So why did they get in that boat at 7:30 on a Saturday night? Brian's account does not explain this satisfactorily. His Facebook message to a friend, obtained by CBS News, does not address the decision to depart at that hour in those conditions. He describes the wind blowing him away from Lynette and paddling for 7 hours. He does not explain why they left. There are two possible explanations. One is that the alcohol Cook believes was involved impaired their judgment to the point where they underestimated the conditions. The other is that the conditions deteriorated rapidly after they departed and were less severe at the point of decision. Neither explanation, however, accounts for the full set of anomalies in Brian's account, and it is those anomalies we turn to now. Let us establish Brian Hooker's account in full before we examine it. This is what he has stated to authorities and in public communications. He and Lynette departed the Elbow Cay area at approximately 19:30 hours on April 4th aboard their 8.5-foot inflatable dinghy. They were heading back to their sailboat Soulmate, anchored near Hopetown. During the crossing, Lynette fell overboard. She had the boat keys on her person. The keys entered the water with her. Without power, Brian was unable to maneuver the dinghy effectively to reach her. The wind and current drove them apart. He watched her drift away in the dark. He threw a flotation device toward her. He then paddled the dinghy, using a single oar, for 7 hours. He washed ashore on a different island at approximately 4 o'clock hours Sunday morning. Upon reaching shore, he made contact with someone at the marina who called the authorities. The search for Lynette began at that point. That is his account. Now let us examine it. Brian Hooker says Lynette went into the water at approximately 19:30 hours on Saturday evening. He says he reported her missing at approximately 4 o'clock hours Sunday morning. That is a gap of approximately 8.5 hours between the incident and the report. His explanation for this gap is the 7-hour paddle to shore. But here is the deeper anomaly. For 7 hours on the water, with his wife missing in 25-mile-per-hour winds and dark water, Brian Hooker made no distress call, no mayday, no radio communication to any vessel in the area. That is anomaly 1, and it is significant. The Maritime Distress Protocol exists precisely for situations like the one Brian Hooker describes. Channel 16 on the VHF marine radio is the international distress frequency. It is monitored by the Coast Guard, by other vessels underway, and by anyone with a marine radio in range. A call on Channel 16 is heard by multiple parties simultaneously. In an area like the Abacos, one of the most heavily sailed recreational sailing areas in the Atlantic, there would have been vessels within radio range on that Saturday night. A man overboard situation is a maritime emergency. The standard response to a maritime emergency is to call for help on Channel 16 immediately. Brian Hooker's account makes no reference to a VHF radio call. It makes no reference to a distress signal of any kind during the 7 hours he says he was on the water. There are 2 possible explanations. 1, the dinghy did not carry a VHF radio. However, handheld marine VHF radios are inexpensive, widely used, and routinely carried as emergency equipment by people who have been sailing for a decade. 2, Brian Hooker had a radio and chose not to use it. We do not know which is true, but the absence is documented, and for experienced sailors in a man-overboard situation, it is anomalous. When a person goes overboard, the single most important thing the remaining person on the vessel can do, after attempting direct rescue, is maintain position. A person in the water in a current has a reference point only if the vessel stays close. If the vessel drifts, the distance between the person in the water and the vessel grows exponentially. Every minute the vessel moves, the search area for that person expands. The standard response to man overboard is mark the position, maintain station, and maneuver to recover the person in the water. You maintain station by deploying the anchor if you cannot maneuver under power. Brian Hooker's account contains no reference to dropping anchor. His message to a friend describes drifting for 7 hours. Not holding position. Drifting. Carly Ellsworth noted this herself, without maritime training, purely on instinct. She said, "I don't know why he didn't drop anchor and look for her. The first thing I would have done is go towards her, not away from her. The stepdaughter's instinct aligns with maritime best practice. The survivor's account does not. Separate from the VHF distress call, there is another option available to any sailor in the Abacos on a Saturday night. The Abacos is a sailing destination. On any given Saturday evening, there are boats anchored throughout the area. Hopetown Harbor, where Soulmate was moored, is a known anchorage with multiple boats at any time. A man on a dinghy in those waters had the option of paddling to a nearby vessel and requesting help. Brian Hooker spent 7 hours on the water. During that time, he passed no vessel, encountered no other boat, found no opportunity to alert anyone. Carly noted this as well. Her words, "I don't know why he didn't go to his boat and call on the radio to other sailboats. Hey, have you seen my wife? She's missing. Because I know boaters would probably go out and help look. Sailboat community culture is well documented. Sailors help each other." None of this happened. Brian Hooker states that Lynette had the boat keys on her when she fell overboard. He states the keys went into the water with her, and that this is why he couldn't use the engine. On a dinghy of this type, the ignition key is the only way to start the engine. Without it, you paddle. Brian's statement that Lynette had the keys on her person, rather than in a holder on the boat or attached to the vessel, places the means of powered rescue in the water, along with the person who needed rescuing. Why did Lynette have the keys on her person while sitting on the side of a pitching dinghy in 25-mile-per-hour winds? Having keys physically on your person in those conditions is an unusual arrangement. This detail is not impossible, but it is convenient. It explains, in a single sentence, why he couldn't use the engine to maneuver to Lynette's position. We note it. We do not overweight it. But we note it. Let us be precise about what these anomalies establish and what they do not. They do not establish that Brian Hooker harmed his wife. They establish that his account of what happened after she allegedly went into the water contains multiple significant departures from the standard behavior of an experienced sailor in an emergency. No distress call, no anchor, no contact with nearby vessels, a 7-hour drift with no attempt to summon help until he reached shore. Each of these anomalies has a possible innocent explanation. Perhaps the dinghy had no radio. Perhaps the conditions were so extreme that anchoring was not feasible. Perhaps panic overrode training. But anomalies are cumulative. One unexplained departure from expected behavior is notable. 2 is concerning. 5 specific, documented failures to take the actions an experienced mariner would take in a man-overboard emergency is a pattern. Patterns in forensic analysis are evidence. Brian Hooker reported Lynette missing at approximately 4:00 Sunday morning. The search began. His first documented contact with Lynette's daughter Carly was on Sunday evening. Not Sunday morning when he surfaced. Not Sunday afternoon as the search was underway. Sunday evening, approximately 8:30 p.m. Carly describes the call in consistent detail across multiple interviews. Brian told her, "Hey, your mum's missing. It happened late last night. But we're going to come up soon, so I hope to see you. And then, oh yeah, sorry, I'm going to search for her. Bye." He got off the phone quickly. Carly's reaction. She was too stunned to respond. What registered with her was not just the content, but the delivery. The call was brief. It was casual. There was no evident distress. Brian mentioned upcoming travel plans to Michigan in the same breath as informing his stepdaughter that her mother was missing. It is important to state clearly, grief responses are not standardized. People in extreme shock can present as flat or disconnected. None of these responses are inherently suspicious. What we can say is this: the content of the call is documented. Brian Hooker mentioned social plans. He ended the call quickly. This is the record. Carly's assessment, not as a forensic analyst, but as his stepdaughter who has known him her whole life, was that it was, in her word, sketchy. In the days following the incident, Brian left Carly a voicemail. In the voicemail, Brian says, "Hello, honey. I just got a call from Hopetown Search and Rescue, and they have found the flotation device that I threw to Mum when she fell overboard. And so they can now focus all of their efforts in a smaller area, and they're still out there searching today. So I just wanted to update you and let you know I love you. I'll talk to you later." Carly's observation about this voicemail is worth noting precisely because it complicates a simple narrative. She said, "When he told me about my mum missing, he didn't have much emotion, but this voicemail seemed like he had a little bit more urgency and emotion towards it." This is honest testimony. Carly is not claiming the voicemail incriminates Brian. She is noting the emotional register was different from the phone call. What does this tell us forensically? It tells us that Brian Hooker is capable of emotional expression around this situation, but that the expression was not present when he first told Carly her mother was missing. Not determinative, but documented. Brian Hooker made a public statement on Facebook on Tuesday morning. "I am heartbroken over the recent boat accident in unpredictable seas and high winds that caused my beloved Lynette to fall from our small dinghy near Elbow Key in the Bahamas. Despite desperate attempts to reach her, the winds and currents drove us further apart. We continue to search for her, and that is my sole focus. Our family is deeply grateful for the Bahamian people's assistance, especially that of the Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue Team, Royal Bahamas Police Force, Royal Bahamas Defense Force, and the U.S. Coast Guard, who have worked tirelessly in an ongoing effort to bring Lynette back to us. Thank you to everyone for keeping Lynette in your thoughts and for your support for our family during this difficult time." Multiple observers, including legal analysts reviewing the case, noted that the statement reads as legally crafted, the specific and complete enumeration of every responding agency, the careful framing of the incident as a boat accident in unpredictable seas. The phrase, "our sole focus," rather than "my sole focus." What the statement does not contain is also worth recording. No description of his efforts to reach Lynette in the water. No reference to the conditions he paddled through for 7 hours. No specific detail about what the desperate attempts to reach her actually looked like. It is a statement about a situation. It is not a statement from a man living inside one. CBS News located Brian Hooker in the Bahamas and approached him on camera. He did not answer their questions. He did not address the allegations his stepdaughter was making publicly. He did not offer an account of what happened on Saturday night. His attorney has responded to media on his behalf. Attorney Terrell Butler has stated that Brian Hooker denies any wrongdoing, including denying the domestic violence allegations Carly has made. This is, of course, his right. The right to remain silent is fundamental. Its exercise is not evidence of guilt. We document it because it is part of the record. A man whose wife is missing, who has been publicly accused by his own stepdaughter of a prior specific threat against the victim's life, standing in a parking lot in the Bahamas, declining to speak. Wednesday, April 8th, 2026, 4 days after Lynette Hooker went into the water. At approximately 1900 hours, the Royal Bahamas Police Force took a 59-year-old American male into custody in Marsh Harbor, Abaco. The official statement cited probable cause. Multiple sources confirmed the person in custody was Brian Hooker. The Assistant Police Commissioner stated to Reuters, "We took him into custody around 7:30 this evening in Abaco for additional questioning based on some probable cause we have." He added explicitly, "He has been taken into custody as a suspect. He's been arrested." Probable cause is a legal standard. It means law enforcement had sufficient articulable facts to believe that a crime had been committed and that the person in custody was involved. It is not the same as charges. It is not the same as a conviction. But it is not nothing. Attorney Terrell Butler has made a significant claim about how the arrest came about. She states that on Wednesday evening, Brian was planning to go out on a search and rescue mission. Before he could do that, authorities asked him to come in for an interview. The interview, Butler says, was framed not as a suspect interview, but as an opportunity for Brian to assist the investigation. He was told he did not need a lawyer. He was told he was not a suspect. He sat in that room for over 3 hours. At the end of that interview, he was arrested. Butler characterizes this as authorities having tricked her client into an interrogation without legal representation. This is a meaningful allegation. If accurate, it raises questions about the evidentiary value of anything said in that interview. However, law enforcement investigative interviews often begin without a formal declaration of suspect status. This is standard practice. The fact that the interview concluded in an arrest suggests that something in that 3-hour conversation provided the additional probable cause authorities were seeking. Under Bahamian law, a person can be held without charges for 48 hours. That window can be extended to 96 hours once a formal suspect interview, with legal representation present, has been conducted. At the time of production, Brian Hooker is in custody. No charges have been filed. The arrest by Bahamian authorities is one part of a significantly larger investigative picture. The United States Coast Guard has opened a criminal investigation. Not a standard search and recovery operation, a criminal investigation. The formal distinction matters. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has confirmed involvement. FBI jurisdiction flows from the American nationality of both parties and the potential criminal nature of the incident. The U.S. State Department is engaged as a liaison. The U.S. Embassy has been in contact with Lynette's family, and Carly Ellsworth, who spoke directly with the Coast Guard, reports that they specifically raised the question of money, life insurance, financial arrangements, the economics of the marriage. The question of whether this investigation is being conducted as an accident review or a homicide investigation is answered by the scope of the agencies involved. You do not mobilize the FBI, the U.S. Coast Guard's Criminal Division, and the Bahamian Police to review an accidental drowning. The financial dimension of this case requires careful treatment because it is a legitimate line of inquiry without being established as a motive. Here is what we know from Carly Ellsworth's testimony. The couple had retirement accounts. Brian had an AT&T pension from which he was already drawing. Lynette had a separate retirement account, but was under the minimum withdrawal age of 59 and a half. The couple were financially dependent on Brian's retirement income. If Lynette left the marriage, her financial position would require her to return to work. On the question of life insurance, Carly believes her mother had a policy through her AT&T employment. She does not believe Brian had one. We cannot confirm whether active policies exist on either party or what the beneficiary arrangements were. The Coast Guard's decision to raise the financial angle with Carly tells us that investigators are treating financial motive as a live line of inquiry. That does not mean it is established. It means it has not been ruled out. In cases of spousal disappearance, financial motive is one of the standard investigative pillars alongside relationship history, prior violence, and physical evidence. All 4 pillars are active in this investigation. We are going to close this case file the way we opened it, with the facts, specifically with what the evidence currently establishes, what it suggests, and what it does not yet answer. Here is what is established. First, Brian and Lynette Hooker were experienced sailors with a decade of documented maritime competence. They were not people who made careless decisions at sea by default. Second, on the night of April 4th, 2026, they departed on a small inflatable dinghy at 7:30 p.m. in conditions that a local first responder described as very rough, pitch dark, and involving a lot of bad decisions. The decision to depart in those conditions is not satisfactorily explained. Third, Lynette Hooker went into the water that night, either by accident or by force. She has not been found. The search has been reclassified as a recovery operation. Fourth, in the period following Lynette's entry into the water, Brian Hooker did not make a VHF distress call, did not deploy an anchor, did not contact nearby vessels, and did not report his wife missing for approximately 8.5 hours. Fifth, a prior documented threat, specific in method, consistent with the mechanism of disappearance, has been placed on record by a named witness with no apparent motive to fabricate it. Sixth, Brian Hooker was arrested on probable cause 4 days after the incident. The U.S. Coast Guard, FBI, and Royal Bahamas Police Force are all conducting or participating in what is now explicitly characterized as a criminal investigation. These are the established facts. Beyond what is established, the evidence, taken in aggregate, suggests the following. It suggests that the decision to go out on that dinghy that night was not made by two people exercising their normal level of caution. The most plausible explanation for that is impairment. It suggests that Brian Hooker's behavior in the period after Lynette went into the water was inconsistent with the behavior of an experienced sailor in a man overboard emergency. It suggests that the relationship between Brian and Lynette Hooker was under significant strain, involved documented physical violence, and had a specific prior verbal threat that directly mirrors the manner of Lynette's disappearance. It suggests that investigators have found, in Brian Hooker's own account and behavior, sufficient probable cause to believe that what happened on April 4th was not an accident. Suggestion is not proof. The distinction matters enormously. We are not in the business of verdicts here. We are in the business of evidence. The evidence, as it stands, does not support the conclusion that this was a straightforward accident. The anomalies are too numerous, too specific, and too directionally consistent to be explained away without interrogation. There is much this case file cannot yet answer, and it is important to name those gaps precisely, because they are the gaps that will determine where this investigation goes. First, there is no body. Without Lynette Hooker's physical remains, a pathologist cannot determine cause of death. Without cause of death, the forensic foundation of a homicide prosecution is absent. Second, there is no direct physical evidence connecting Brian Hooker to a crime. No witnesses who saw what happened on that boat. No forensic evidence from the dinghy that has been publicly reported. No confession. The case, as it currently exists in the public record, is circumstantial. Circumstantial cases can be prosecuted successfully. They are tried and won regularly. But they require a level of accumulated evidence that this investigation is still in the process of building, if it can be built at all. Third, we do not know what the probable cause consisted of. The Bahamian authorities have not publicly disclosed what evidence or information led them to arrest Brian Hooker. Fourth, the financial dimension is a line of inquiry, not an established motive. And fifth, Brian Hooker has not been charged. Through his attorney, he denies everything. Every person in this case file is entitled to the presumption of innocence until a court of law says otherwise. Lynette Hooker was a woman who loved the water. She had spent 10 years at sea. She knew how to sail a boat. She knew how to climb a mast. She had crossed the Gulf of Mexico and navigated the Caribbean. She was planning to help her daughter find an apartment. She sent a voice message at 11:30 at night saying she would talk in the morning. She did not. What exists on land, the testimony, the documented behavior, the prior threats, the anomalies in the account, the breadth of the criminal investigation, points in a direction. We will continue to follow this case. We will update this file when the record changes. The investigation is ongoing. The case file remains open.